to join, is planning on joining. Okay, so I think we're sorted for the moment. Just some house rules before we get started. We've had 2 very late withdrawals. We're not trying to get rid of the men on purpose. They kind of remove themselves. So our 2 male panelists are unfortunately not part of this discussion. So our on-the-fly thinking is gonna take a bit of a dip there, but I'm gonna navigate this conversation as best I can with the 2 of you. It might be a little bit of a blessing in disguise to focus on your 2 wonderful books that I've really enjoyed. Ladies and gentlemen, just before we start, if you have a cell phone that's still on, let's just put them on silent so we don't have any disturbances for our conversation, and then we'll get cracking. So, Popina and Joy, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Suid-Oosterfees conversation that we have going today. We are focusing on storytelling and writing as the act of bearing witness, and it is a serious topic. We are going to talk about gender violence, questions of representation and intimacy, and storytelling itself. You are both excellent supreme storytellers, but before we get into the heart of the conversation and speak about your books, could you just take 30 seconds to a minute to just introduce yourselves to the audience, if there's anyone that might not be familiar?
Okay, I guess I'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you all doing? Thank you. I'm well. My name is Popina Khumanda. I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. Je parle français, Lingala, Swahili. Ik kan ook Afrikaans praat. Ik heb een Afrikaans kinderreis groot geword. Wat anders, I also speak English, and I wrote the smallest ones. It's a story about the genocide that is currently happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it's one of the first books that has ever been written from a person that comes from the DRC and who has experienced the genocide, the children minings, the rebel attacks, and the capturing that takes place in the villages. So that is what my book is about.
Good. Is this working? Good. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Cape Townians don't come out when the weather's like this. So clearly all of you have determination. Congratulations and well done. I'm very surprised to see you. I thought it would be us and Jonathan today. So I'm Joy Watson. I work as a consultant in the kind of national and global space. And my work really centers around thinking about how to build social equity. So work that tries to create a different kind of social order, one where we don't see the warfare that we have currently globally. So trying to create a different set of social values, and really, about kind of peace building generally. My book, Because I Love You, is actually non-fiction and was inspired by something that happened to me personally. But then I engaged in a year-long process of working with 3 women who shared their stories with me. And this is not a book about physical harm. It's about the more insidious harm that lives quietly inside of a relationship. So when, everything sort of looks perfect on the outside, but over time there's just this scratching on this, that kind of beneath the surface of things, all is not well, and where kind of many years later you look and go, but this is not making me happy. So I was keen to try and pin down something about the kind of emotional and psychological harm that relationships can do.
Thank you very much for anticipating my first question and answering it so well, Joy. No, Nee, Mos. So in all seriousness, I'm going to pivot the conversation to something that was a little bit broader, to an intimate and more specifically focused conversation on the 2 books that you have written. Popina, if I can start with you, I'll start with an observation that I'd like you to comment on. Your book fundamentally is a kind of hero's journey story, but it is a story that is told in the most extreme way possible. You have experienced things that most of us in this room can only really dream about or have a frame of reference where it comes to books and films and stories, but it is a story that is generally still in our imagination, something out there. It is not an experience that we are likely to have had. When you write a book, as someone who is not necessarily a writer by trade, where do you start in making sense of a life, and you are still a comparatively young person, of a life that has taken you to the extremes of human experience and has been in many ways very traumatic? How do you make sense of that trauma for an audience? And how do you go about structuring a book in a way that is still in some way hopeful, that has tenderness, that has love, that has compassion? And how do you not lose sight of the important things, the love that is at the core of this book, right, when you are writing a story like this?
When I came to South Africa, I was not able to speak English. I didn't know what English was. I didn't know what writing or reading was, because in my village there was no school. And we learned through the forest, nature, and just stories that our grannies and aunties would tell us. So when I came to South Africa, and the purpose was to write the story. But before the story, we need to remember that the history of Congo itself, that story was already written before I was even born. So I am just here to narrate the story from the actual being that has experienced it. So in order for me to structure it, it was something that had to come from first understanding the background of where I'm coming from, the history behind the brutality, the violence, and the oppression that a lot of Congolese people have experienced. So when I set myself down and I asked myself, how do I come across gentle yet very raw and authentic? It was more of trying to make the reader, they must be able to digest it, especially people that have never experienced that, trauma or the consequences of history and war itself. I had to sit down and just look at it in a point of like love and support, because that's also another fundamental a phase and experience that I experienced when I came to South Africa. I experienced a lot of love and support. So for me to be able to now sit and write it, it was just a matter of like trying to understand the humane of being human and existing in times where we live in like parallel dimensions, and in those dimensions there's time, and in that time there are feelings, there are emotions, and there's a present moment, at the same time there's a past. So it was just a matter of like just capturing it at once and then breaking it down into the past, the present, and the future. That's how I was looking at it, and in such a way that the story is not just a today's story, but it stays relevant and it's able to connect to humans. It's able to really take humanity back and ask ourselves, what are we really here for? If there are people in the DRC, or if there are people in Gaza, Palestine, Israel, Sudan that are experiencing this, what is the purpose of humanity itself?
I'm so glad you've mentioned the question of authenticity. I think both of your books, and Joy will come to you in a second, I think both of your books are so powerful because you remove any sense of outside noise, and what you read feels profoundly authentic. It feels like you're having a very personal conversation with the reader. And I think the important thing with a book or books that are about gender, that are about violence, that are about trauma and history, and are necessarily very heavy subjects, that they are told in an accessible way. And I think you've done that in a brilliant way, Popina. It is such a powerful book, but it is also accessible, and you could recommend it to literally anybody. You could give someone the book and say, this is my story, please read it, and they can get something from that. Joy, you know academia as a minefield at the best of times. It is very, very difficult to speak about issues in a way without your audience experiencing issue fatigue or trauma fatigue. Sometimes it feels like we're competing in a trauma Olympics. You know, every single day there's another issue. There's Gaza, there's Palestine, there's the war on crime, drugs, the Cape Flats. Everything feels overwhelming. Why is it important that we still have this conversation about bearing witness and gender politics? And how can we bridge that divide between people that feel bombarded with information but still give them something new or something fresh? Are we approaching the subject from the right angles, or is there something that we can add in this conversation that is new? How can we turn people's heads to truly listen and want to listen?
That's such a good question, Jonathan. I don't know that I have the answer, but I do know that it's something that I try to do with the book, Because I Love You. I'm very aware that as South Africans, even I think, beyond our borders, that we are saturated by violence. We're saturated by stories that are about harm and blood and guts, and it's a lot. I know of a book that was written, a really good one actually, on gender-based violence that didn't do that well, and it was because people just have so little to give, and when you wanting to pick up a book, you're wanting mostly to escape into something else. You're wanting to get away from the everyday and what's happening in Gaza. And while all of those things are important, and it's important to sit in it, I've been thinking a lot about methodologies for getting people to sit with ideas that are hard in ways that don't kind of reignite the trauma. So what does the inroad look like when you're engaging with difficult subject matter, but how might we bring you in gently and not have it be overwhelming? And so with this book, I actually saw outside that they put it as a fiction book, and it's not non-fiction. But there's a bit of part of me that likes that, because my technique in the book to bring readers in a way that feels safe and feels palatable is to tell it like it's a story. So it feels like you're reading a novel. And it continues in that way. In fact, even at the end of each of these 3 stories, you would not say it's dealing with very difficult subject matter just because it's, when you read a book and you kind of curled up with your cup of tea and it's like describing the scenery, it does all of those things. But at the end of the day, it's asking you to think about some things that are connected but might seem disconnected. So there's a connection between what we see happening in the global geopolitical space and how we show up in our relationships. There's a connection between what goes on in a family and how that spills out into a community, how that spills over into a country, and then the global space. So the values we see, like a lot of kind of Trump-dominated madness in the world, come from many Trumps in the US, many Putins in the world, and they paint, from a family level picture, a global picture. And so I'm interested in shining that light in on what happens in the space of that, the space where you're meant to feel the most safe, which is your relationship. And to not even look at the obvious things, like, when you deal with, in the space of your relationship and the actual bruises and somebody's hurt you physically, in some ways that is a terrible, difficult thing, but it's easier to see than when it's non-physical. And so with this book, like, it's a conduit for thinking about harm and violence that you can't see. There's no bruises, there's no blood. but it's asking us to think about how we show up in the world and how our words and our actions have power over other people. We can use it to kind of spread the love that you're talking about, or we can use it to slowly erode someone's sense of self and to break them down. And it's that level of breaking down that at a macro level picture causes the global warfare that we see.
That's a really wonderful and multifaceted answer. You've given us a lot to think about. I like the question of language that you've raised here, because if you can't name something in the world, it literally cannot exist. There's no conception of it, right? You are framing your book, and you've now spoken about the fact that it's called fiction, but it's not. A comment on what you're doing, Joy, if you'll allow me. It's a very clever trick that you're pulling with this book, because you're inviting the reader to read one kind of book, but you're actually selling them two books at the same time, right? There is.
I like that. Can you be my salesperson?
I charge quite a commission. So
Okay. I
just,
don't know if I can afford
just be
to,
sure you can afford me. So the nice thing about the book being accessible, being readable, being instantly gripping, right, which is very important because people have short attention spans. You are talking about incredibly important things, but you are not calling it out by the name and then making it too obvious and easy to dismiss. It is an almost, I don't want to use the word insidious because that's not what it is, but there is a subtlety to what you're doing that is very important in order to win readers over, to open their minds and to give them food for thought without it being an issue book. Because people, if they see a book is about an issue or something, they're like, no, I don't want that, it's too heavy. I want to escape. So you're allowing them and affording them this opportunity to escape, but you're actually pulling them in. And what happens in this book is that there is a confrontation, not only between the reader and an outside element, or the reader, which we can see as being female and a broad male counterpart, right? But it's a confrontation with the self. It is about our own vulnerabilities, our own prejudices, our own animating thoughts, our own unconscious desires, our erotic life, our intimacy, our friendships, our family. It is a very, very multifaceted book, and you are selling the reader an intellectual journey while being very accessible. So I'm really glad you've written the book in this way, and there is something to be said for intellectual books that are accessible. Popina, your book for me does exactly the same. We have the broad strokes that will interest a great many readers. It's a sweeping story. It is a story about a trauma and a personal journey and a story of survival, and you as a person thriving, right? Not just coming out in one piece the other side, but making an entirely new life, showing everyone that reads the book that it is possible, and it is possible to hold on to the better part of yourself while experiencing trauma and dehumanization and extreme violence. So my question is for both of you. Popina, if you can answer first. When we write about violence, and we don't want to be sensational and obvious and make it something that knocks the reader over the head without subtlety, how do you write a book about such traumatic experiences while retaining your own voice, the own sense that this is a personal journey that is different to everyone else's? How do you retain that core of authenticity, really, but writing about trauma in a way that is accessible and deep? How do you go about that?
I first had to because when we finally escaped the DRC, we walked from DRC to South Africa, and that took us like 4.5, almost 5 months to get to South Africa. And in that walk, there's some sort of like your subconscious mind that awakens. And when I came then in South Africa, there was like media, television, which I was not used to, like social medias as well, and how people communicate and engage with each other, which was very violent, coming from such a violent space, and then where violence was not a thing in our community, in our village. So, and then to be exposed to an environment whereby they actually embrace the violence. The violence is in the movie script. It's vivid. It's loud. It's in your face. The sexual harassment, sexual abuse. It's in the storytelling of love and like the whole Hollywood storytelling. There's violence. There's abuse. And it's normalized in such a way that the media itself, they're not afraid to showcase that. But once it comes to writing, you must now tone it down and be a bit conscious, or like be a bit, like you must basically not say it as it is, because then you freak out the reader, or the reader is not willing to engage, but they're willing to engage in things like movies. So it just made me realize that when it comes to violence, there is some sort of power that is in place. And once you take away the violence, you take away the power, you take away the system, you take away the whole script of how humans are being subconsciously programmed to actually be thrilled in that, be excited to want to see what happens next in that violent and aggressive mode. So it was just interesting to see that subconsciously it's something that is being indulged in, it's something that is accepted, but then at the same time we are trying to create awareness of gender-based violence, whereby it's in our face every day, and people celebrate that. When something goes wrong or someone is fighting, the first thing a person does is take out their phone and videoize it and then share it on Instagram or share it on Facebook, and then it goes viral. But then when we sit in programs like this, the place is hardly fulfilled or full. But why can't writers just be raw as the filmmakers? Why can't writers be just daring as the filmmakers? So for me, when I was writing the smallest ones, which is something that can't be filtered, it has to be expressed as it is, because there's millions and millions of children dying every day. So I couldn't now filter it and be like, I'm gonna hide away from this when so many of my people are dying. You understand?
Very, very powerful. Joy, we'll get to you in a second. I want to talk about your title, Popina, and it is such a moving part of the story. The smallest ones, we won't spoil it for the readers, they can figure out that for themselves, but you make yourself and all the people who have been victims in the story, you make them the exact opposite of being small. You give them a voice. You make their voice loud. It is a voice that carries across past, present, it will carry into the future, and it is such a remarkably powerful thing because it is true and it feels true. So I want to thank you for being brave enough not only to write a story, the writing of the story is one thing, but to own your story so powerfully, to live in it and to be in it, and to essentially tell us that we are also allowed to be part of your story, because this is not a story about an us and a them. This is a story about an us. We're all human beings on this planet, and we all experience things, and your story really manages to transcend those barriers that we erect between people based on language, race, history, culture, small things in the greater scheme of being human that people use to erect barriers and walls and keep people apart. So your story is doing something very, very profound. It is bringing us together, and it is making us listen. And the listening aspect to change things is incredibly powerful, because it is intimate, and it is something that brings our whole world to a halt, right? So thank you, really, sincerely, thank you very much for writing this book, and it is enormously appreciated what you have done. Joy, your book is no less appreciated. You are doing incredibly important work. I want to ask you not about the difficulties of writing this book, because there can be many. It is a challenging enterprise. But when you sit down, you are writing about forms of violence and harm, but you are also writing about the search to find something better, right? You are digging and excavating very, very deeply into the human psyche and the human experience to find something that can be a kernel of truth for good, right? So I want to ask you, when writing about these stories of trauma and harm, where did you find the fault lines where you actually said, okay, but we can focus on this and this? Where did you find the hope and the motivation to actually see this through in such a very, very dark space? Because it is difficult work, also psychically, for someone to write this book, right? So where did you find those points of light and said, okay, but we can work with this, this can be of value?
So maybe I'll start by saying that the inspiration for this book came from, and it's hard for me to talk about this, but the book was born when my husband, who I loved with my heart and soul, we're going through a rocky patch in our marriage, and we were struggling to find each other. We sort of took some time out, and then we recommitted. And just shortly after recommitting and making vows to kind of give it our all, he met somebody else. It didn't help that she was younger, much younger. And look, these things happen all the time. It's not great. But it can be okay. I think that what made it not okay was the way in which he did it. He didn't have the courage to have a conversation with me, so there were no words. He basically, when he decided that this was the path he was choosing, he just ghosted me. And so it was this experience of trying to, and I didn't have words for what it did to me. I knew that it was bad and that it was a form of trauma, because at the end of the day, all of us as human beings, the basics of what we need is to be seen and to be heard. And I was phoning a man with whom I had shared more than 10 years, who wasn't taking my calls. I was sending WhatsApps to say, can we please talk? I was driving my car at night and pulling over and sobbing and calling and calling. And it was as if though I didn't exist. And so I became very interested in the notion of erasure, of what it means to be erased by somebody, and by somebody who you love so deeply. And so in trying to, and it was a self-preservation thing. I wanted to understand, to find language for it, and in doing that I wanted to find other people who had experienced something like this so that they could help me make sense. And so, I found initially more than 3 women, but it filtered down to 3 because they were the 3 who sat with me and kept the relationship active. And so, and what I was looking for was very clear. Tell me a story about where somebody has hurt you, because I knew that the hurt that had happened to me left an indelible mark on my psyche. It was as if something had torn me in half. And that there had been I think it would have been easier if there had been signs along the way to say, this person is a monster, but he wasn't. He was lovely and kind. And, there were no seeds to pick up, no trail of crumbs. Like he was only a monster when he became one. And it didn't help that despite the fact that what he did was so cruel and so monstrous, I still loved him. And there was no place to take that to. I couldn't. I wanted to know. Okay, if I'm a bad person, tell me what I could have done better. Give me words. I want to wrap this up with a little blow. I want some closure. And there was just no way of finding that. And so I had to write my own closure. And the gift is that these three women, in sharing their stories, helped me do meaning making, because in them telling me something about themselves, I told them my story. And it became meaning making sessions where we were finding ourselves in those conversations. So I don't have the words, it sounds like gobbledygook and fairy talk, but something really magical happened there, that they gave me the closure I needed, that this deep, fundamental scarring could begin to be healed, and without him, where I could go, this happened and it's terrible and I don't have words, but I can begin again, and I can love again, and I can try again. And I've eventually come to a place where a friend said to me, you know what, he was amazing when for all the years that we did that, and we had so much fun and there was so much love, and at least you had that. And quite frankly, I would rather not have had that. It hurt me so much, and it took so much from me, that I wish I'd never met him. And yet I sit here and there's still deep and tremendous love for him. And how do all of those nonsensical things make sense? They don't. But in some way, and then this is going to sound stupid, it's got me thinking about the bigger things in life, that life is all about endings, right? And at the biggest ending one day will come where we are no longer here. And so in some ways, endings like the ending I had with Stephen are just dress rehearsals for the bigger ending that is to come. And how do you, when you don't get to choose how that ending plays out, how do you go with as much grace and step into it with as much courage and as much joy, dare I even say, as you can? And how do you begin again? Because that's the other side of endings, that we begin again.
I'm literally thinking of the book while you're talking about it, and you've got many passages in the book that speak about this very explicitly, right? Your book it's a wonderful, I don't want to get too academic, but it's a wonderful tissue of quotations, right? You've got the Audre Lorde in there about the erotic life and the curiosity. I think what struck me the most about both of your books is that you're telling obviously powerful stories, but there's a profound curiosity and interest in the human experience, in its messiness, right? And I think we are very uncomfortable with messiness and nuance right now. We don't like being uncomfortable, right? We like a black and white. And there is an obvious black and white in your stories. You can demonize men, right? You can say, well, these are the people that did this to me and my people, and they are horrible, they are monsters, but they also have a story. And the same thing with your book, Joy. You tell the story in such convincing and vivid detail. You go to such difficult, dark places. But we are not entirely without sympathy for the men, because they have their own experiences. They have their own pain and their own trauma. So my question for both of you, Popina, maybe you can start, is this question of nuance and holding potentially contradictory ideas up in the air at the same time. You know, Keats speaks about the negative capability. That idea of holding things that might even be a contradiction, right? Someone can be a monster, but they can also be a child, and they can also be a brother and a father, and people are not just one thing. So in your context, a war-riven context, especially back home, how do you represent that three-dimensional humanness, you know, without going into a simplistic binary of black and white and ones and zeros, you know, because that's not helpful. That doesn't bring us any closer to answers. So how do you do that? And then, Joy, my question for you is, with your academic knowledge and your studies of genders and of gender and things like that, does it make life and living easier, or does it make it more difficult, knowing that, right, and still wanting to engage with people?
I'm just gonna go to Joy quickly. I'm really touched by what you said about women, because normally when we are in such broken places, it's always women that come and help us, get ourselves together again, find light, and find a new purpose again. So that was really touching, because you took me back to the women that helped me as well in my journey. So it just shows the importance of women coming together and just supporting each other. That was really, and I'm really sorry, Stephen. Let's not even go there. He's not here, right?
No.
Okay.
Also, he's ghosting me, so even if he could be here, he wouldn't be.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, muni worry van hom. We're gonna sort him out. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
R.I.P. Stephen.
Yeah. Going back to your question now, the boys that were turned into soldiers. So we got captured by the rebels, and then part of the initiation that the boys go through is that they have to rape the women and girls from their own village. It's part of like kind of brainwashing. Yeah, they get brainwashed, and then there's alcohol, there is drugs for them. So in a way, it's like a whole, like resetting of the mind and the subconsciousness that happens to them. And when I started writing about this, because I started writing the book when I was doing my second year at Nelson Mandela University, I had to just go back and try to understand their state as well, of the conditions that they were in. And it broke me down to realize that they were just victims as I was. And with that, how do I sit now and forgive, the men, the boys that tortured me for 5 years? How do I sit and accept and forgive them? And it goes back to that, going back and realizing, but he was such a good boy. We used to play together. And then a situation just happened where he actually became a monster as well. And would I go back and rewrite or redo the goodness out of that boy? Not really, because my experience and yours was probably different, but at the same time, it brought us to the exact same pain. And I'm always hearing people saying, oh, but you had a much harder life, or you've experienced more pain. Pain is pain. It doesn't matter how small or how, it's just pain, and you have to go through it. You have to sit with it. You have to accept it. And then from there, you start, finding ways to how can you heal. And sometimes we find the healing in our communities. We find healing in our friendships, and the women that, just comes to you and become that pillar in your life. So writing about the boys now and understanding their situation, it brought so much healing for me, and made me realize that men also go through their own challenges, that they are not really willing to sit like this. Look, where are they now? You see? They were supposed to be here. So they're not willing to sit and, have this discussion, because in society, in communities, that will be seen as like, yeah, that's klankie reg, you kom klaai oor sy pa or sy ma, whereby us women, we're very vocal about it, we express ourselves. So it was just a very heavy sit, to accept it and then try to see the good in them, and also write about that about the boys as well. So it was interesting.
Girlfriend, you're like a pot of wisdom.
Where?
Joy, can you tell us about briefly your experience as an academic, and then sort of moving behind that, going home and then sitting with all this knowledge, and then you still have to be a person in the world, and you still have to navigate interpersonal relationships, right? And is there any kind of barrier, or does it help you in any way to have this knowledge about men and to understand them better, or is it actually a hindrance?
Do you know, so a dear friend, Amanda Gou, said to me once, it doesn't look like feminists get to have like great relationships. They just kind of fall apart. So I think that, like when you look at the world through a lens, and not just, I'm not just talking feminism, like through the lens of building social equity. So whether it's about, we must give the land freaking back, these are difficult conversations, and you're going to end up fighting with people. And so, I'm in a space where I look at the world through a political lens, because if you're talking about building an equitable society, it's political, and then you have political views, and it's not always palatable.
But Joy, to interrupt you, is it political or is it just human? This word of things being politics is to me a ridiculous concept.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as politics. People exist in society. That is political.
You'd think it's actually sense 101, right? Like, we human beings, like, we need to all have enough, all have a roof over our heads, all have enough to eat and so on. But yet we espouse capitalist systems and ways of living together, and values that just go against building that kind of equity. But what I did want to say is that I think also that there are ways in which, and I'm using particularly a feminist lens, a way of being in the world where you are really striving. And feminism, can I just say this? It's not just, it is about looking after the rights of women, but it's not just about that. Like this has been an absolute mind explosion for me. If you look at what's going on in the world right now and all the warfare, if feminists were running the world, that would not happen, because we believe in equity for all human beings, and it just goes against the tenets of feminism, the values, what we espouse. So it benefits everybody. You wouldn't have the violence and stuff. So I feel that my feminism has brought me so much. Like, I come from a community of people who were very religious. My grandmother was Afrikaans, very strict, very value driven. And when I was 18, 19 years old, I couldn't peep, I couldn't say a word. I was taught to be seen and not heard. And it's taken me a long time to find my voice. And now that I've found it, I can't shut up. But I've also had to unlearn, the kind of very strict religious values that I was brought in. I had to learn to be somatic in my body, learn that the body is not a dirty, sinful thing, learn that it is okay to dance naked under the moonlight if you want, that sex is juicy and beautiful, and I put that in the book, you must be having it. And even if you think that you are an older woman, no, you are alive until you are dead, and you must be doing these things.
Amen.
Thank you. So I think it's given me a lens for living more joyfully and more authentically in the world. And I look at my daughter, sometimes I think, oh my God, what have I done? And I've said this to her, because she's very feminist. I say, sometimes, I look at you and I think, why didn't I take you to the church and bring you up, and why don't you be seen and don't be? And she was like, that is your thing. You brought me up like this, and this is how I am. So, and I wouldn't change it for all the world. I do wish that, some of the stuff, I grew up where you can't leave a teaspoon in the sink at night, because then it would be the end of the freaking world. My mother would be throwing everything out. And so when my daughter leaves a teaspoon in the sink, it really kind of I have to struggle. But at the same time, she's politically savvy and kind and gorgeous and has views that I didn't have at her age. And it's the thing that I look at when I see many young South African people. Do you know how woke and sexy these kids are? It's not like from my generation. So feminism and other politics has given our young people something incredible. And if we had more of them in parliament and not all the older folk, we'd have a different kind of country.
That's very much my next question, right? How do we build genuine allyship that's not performative? Everything is about screens and social media and virtue signaling, and I'm doing this, but so few of those people actually do something in a community. So what is a genuine allyship and an equality across gender and political lines? What does that look like to the both of you practically? what can women and men do? Because the male voice is also important, right? Men have to call out other men. Otherwise, there's no point. So how can men and women go about creating a more equitable, stronger allyship where people actually work together and get things done and have political agency without just talking about it?
Okay. I'm going to take it back to where I'm coming from. Just because I only got to meet my mom. The last time I saw my mom, I was like 5 years old, and then I got to see her again when I was 21. So and I was at university. She has 12 children. My mom got married when she was 13. Yeah, her first child was when she was 15. She never got to finish school. She stopped at grade 5 because her father believed if she has too much knowledge, she's not going to be desirable for marriage. So they stop the girls from going to school at grade 5 or even grade 3. They stopped taking the girls to school. For me, what I got from my mom, and just, I'm looking at the women from where I'm coming from, was that you don't really need to do much, like a big change, because when we're thinking of like feminism, a lot of women think that, oh no, they have to go out there and change the world. No, feminism is just starting with yourself, because once you start with yourself, you become an example for someone next to you. So they'll start imitating or trying to follow your steps without you even trying so hard to show it out there, or to be like, look at me. By just you living your authentic life and pushing those boundaries and limitations that is set for you as a woman, that is you already changing the narrative and changing the world. So it started with me, because I could reflect from my mother's experience, and my mother could reflect from her mother's experience, and she gave me I'm so proud of you. You have broken down the barriers of women in our bloodline. So it starts there, just you being yourself and looking at your surroundings and saying, I want to do better, not for them, but for myself. And then with that change, you start, having an impact everywhere you go, because then you are mirroring people. They start looking at themselves through you. If she can do it, why can't I? Why can't I try as well? Yeah.
Very inspiring. Thank you.
What was the question?
Joy, how can we really work together to create this more equitable and more politically responsible society?
I think at the one level, it's a social norms change, the values that we uphold. And we have to have a long-term vision for that, right? Like we see in the world now, the rise of fascist, militaristic, Donald Trumpish kind of values, and these things, you watch the manosphere, it is frightening. And the thing about this is that this is planned, it's targeted, there's messaging that reaches men, and there was a vision in building and reinforcing
It's
this.
a multi-billion-dollar industry.
It's exactly.
It's very profitable.
So we have to hold vision for a long-term game to change that. And it starts, as you say, how you mirror the different kind of values, alternative values to the world. So me, it sounds so stupid, but I get up every day and I go like, how do I show up with kindness and gentleness, and because that's, and without saying things like that to my daughter, I just wanted to copy that. How do you then work in coordinated ways? And so for me, I hold down a job, but I also work in feminist spaces where we're trying to do long-term change of social norms. But I also hugely believe in meeting people where they're at. Where people are gathered is where they're at, and that's where you must be. So, when was it last year, Easter, I got an invitation from St. George's Cathedral to preach. And I was like, I'm not way above my pay grade, can't do that once. And it was such a joke though, because in the end, they convinced me, and then I was hiding in the church, and they came to say no. You know that whole procession when they walk up with the cross and alles. I had to beep, and I was like, God, I'm a fake. But this is the thing. It's like my sister said to me, "You get your ass up on that pulpit." Because I said, but what's the point? I'm going to talk about global warfare. Now it's wrong. And she's like, and then you do that there. And I think that, you know, our faith-based institutions are powerful opening points to reach people, and that's where we must be to create these alternative values. What are the other places where you find community? Like Santal's in Bauer Library, they create space, they create community through books, but to engage with ideas. How do we use those spaces effectively? So I'm big on thinking about what already exists and how do you use it as a space for social norm change over time.
I think we have to look to the present, but also to the future, and be goal driven and be action oriented, and to actually want to do things, you know, and be aware of the spaces. There is a whole entire different conversation about the fact that we live in South Africa and how this place shapes our experience and our feminism. That's for next year. That's a big conversation to be held. But before we turn it over to the audience for some questions, nice juicy question for you both. Who are the strong women that you look up to? Where do you find your inspiration from?
You can start first.
Okay, so, you know, this is a difficult one to answer because I look to women in my family who were strong but not in the ways that we would expect. So I am haunted by those who have gone. My mother, my grandmother, and they lived a life. My mom went to school for 3 years, and all the girls were taken out and the boys continued because my granny didn't see the point. They were going to be wives. And, you know, I look at my mom and her sisters' lives, and they didn't begin to have the life opportunities that I have. And it makes me really sad and really angry. Every time I get on an aeroplane, every time I buy a book or I have buying power to buy something, I can just remember that they couldn't do this. And that they lived very small lives, but you would never think that when you met them because they were in their homes and they cooked and they did things, but they were as fulfilled and made the best of everything, and just a tremendous strength it took. Like when I think about the political context that they grew up in, the fact that some of them were unhappy in their marriages, they did not have jobs, they could not leave, and yet they put one foot in front of the other and they just carried on. And it's these ordinary women that I think, like, you know, I'm less interested in the Lillian Ngoys and also the famous South African veterans of our struggle. I'm interested in the ordinary women who made sacrifices in their day-to-day lives to ensure the longevity of their line. And it's on their backbone that our society is built, and they're the unspoken heroes. And, you know, in some ways, I went into therapy after my husband left. My therapist, one of the things is she was like, why do you push yourself so hard? And why do you keep feeling you need to do more things, write another book, do this, do that? And it's like, I'm doing it because the women before me couldn't. And so I kind of feel like this obligation that I'm free and I must do everything and enjoy everything and live everything in their name. And, you know, like, I have to find ways of doing that in a healthy way and also getting some sleep. But yeah, they're the people who walk next to me every day.
For me as well, it's being captured for 5 years. I got to see a lot of my friends die, and one of my best friends, Noham, she just died in her sleep. And as we were like walking down to South Africa, my sister just kept on telling me that when you get to South Africa, you must be best friends with education. There is power in education. There is power in reading and writing. And then I would ask her, what is that? She would say, like, no, the teacher will will teach you how to do all these things, but I don't want you to get distracted. So when I'm looking at inspiration, or I'm trying to get that adrenaline of like not giving up, or of like really trying to achieve something that seems impossible to many, I'll go back to the children that have died right in front of my eyes. And I'll ask myself, if Noham was alive today, what would she want, for herself, and where would she be? And because of that, I'm always doing things because I know that there's so many lives, there's so many children that never had the opportunities that I am being given. So when I'm given an opportunity, I really take it and I make it a big deal. I just go all in, I show up, and I just make sure that I have to thrive in it, because there's so many children who are not being given these opportunities. It's the children that inspire me. Yeah.
The theme for this session has been how writing becomes witness and bearing witness, and I think a fundamental part of that both of you have now touched on is that we are never, ever, ever allowed to forget. Yeah. We may not have historical amnesia. We must not forget about all the people that have come before, that have sacrificed, that have given their lives, their livelihoods, that have had stories erased by a male-centric telling of history. Right, and that we are allowed to be here in 2026 on a public platform in this country. We also have a lot of freedom, and with that freedom comes a responsibility. And I think the two of you have spoken so wonderfully and so warmly and openly about your way of being in the world, and you haven't only spoken about it, but you have demonstrated it by showing up, by being here, by showing your warmth and tenderness towards each other. Right, and for allowing this audience to be let into a small part of your world. And that is why these conversations are so fucking important. Right? That is what we need to do. We need to have more of these conversations, bringing people together, right? And getting people away from screens and just Netflix and social media into an actual space where we can engage. So that is the joy. That is the joy of this, right? And you are inspiring people not only to be better, but also to read. And that is what this festival is also in part about, encouraging that emotional literacy. And that's what you get from reading books, right? Because you get to be more empathetic. Yeah. And if we can be more empathetic, we can be better people. And we can ask better questions, right? So thank you very much for your truly inspirational presence here. The two of you have given as much as 4 people would have given. So I don't think anyone has lost out in terms of this conversation.
The 2 aren't here and have lost out.
Yeah, well, they've lost out. Yeah, it's their loss. But you have really shown up today, and thank you very, very much. So from my side, I'm just honored to be here and to be able to chat to such strong women. It's really inspirational. Thank you.
Can we thank the people who didn't stay under their duvets with their books?
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
So your books are going to be on sale, but before you sign the books, let's get some questions from the audience. I'm sure we've got a few. The back there, yes.
Oh, I get a mic. Okay. Hi, how are you?
Hello.
My question is for Popina. I had to draft it down because, young people.
Yeah.
So you spoke about the boys that would ensue violence to you, women, younger girls, and I wanted to ask from your perspective. Obviously, this is not their experience is not yours. So from your perspective, right? I believe that when a person is in power, they enjoy that power. Right, and I believe that they were in positions of power when they were ensuing that type of violence to you and to the other young girls. So my question is, do you believe that the boys who grew up to become the men who were previously brainwashed, at some point in their lives when they were ensuing that violence, they started enjoying this violence because of the power trip that they had?
Yes. In the book, you'll see that they actually started enjoying it, and they lived for it every day, because they would deliberately come to just torture us. Yeah, it became part of them, and there's no way you can now sit that person down and try and take it out from them. They just it just takes over. Yeah. Yeah. Is there any questions?
I do want to ask Joy a question later. I want to know, what do you suggest as, I mean, you've been through a horror. What is a healing journey for you? What does that look like?
The healing journey for me is me talking about it, is writing about it, and also creating awareness that as we speak right now, there are girls who are being captured and they're going through the same thing that I went through. Some of them won't live up to 30 years old. Yeah. Yeah.
So if I can just comment, would you say that the most important thing is to break the silence?
Yes, it's
because only when you bring it to the light can it heal.
Yes, it's to break the silence, and in most cases, a lot of Congolese people are not able to break the silence because they can't communicate. They don't know how to speak English, and when it comes to French, it's not a global standard language, so it's very limited. And because it's limited, it's controlled in such a way that those stories never come out. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Beverly, and well, what the question that I actually want to know from you, and this intrigues me as I think, well, I'm a scholar of migration. So I'm asking myself, why the journey from Congo to South Africa? It took you guys 5 months to enter South Africa. Why would you decide to come to South Africa and not one of the other neighboring countries?
So in this situation, my sister had a dream before we even got captured. She had a dream, but when she was explaining the dream, while we were in captivity, she was like, she saw a young woman standing in front of like millions of people, and there was a South African flag behind me, behind the person. At the end, she was like, it was me. She saw a huge South African flag behind me, and she was trying to reach to the front. She was right at the back, and she was struggling to get to the front. She couldn't. So she was like, that dream told her that she needs to send me to South Africa. Yeah, that was the dream. It was led by a dream.
No, I don't want to give any comments, but I'd like to maybe see you for a couple of minutes after this,
Okay.
if it's okay. Thanks.
Hi, thanks so much for your story. It was really intriguing to hear. I know we're exploring how writing becomes witness. I'm also intrigued about how writing becomes transformative. And could you perhaps give us insights into the catalyst that made you write on this specific day, how long the journey took, who you were before, and potentially who you were when you penned the last word?
When I started writing the smallest ones, I was very vulnerable when I started. And at some point when I got to chapter 6, I wasn't able to write anymore because I was really taken back to where I really come from, and I had to face it. I was not able to write anymore, and at the same time I was dealing with like a lot of exams at varsity, and I was like a lecturer assistant to my professors and so on. There was a lot happening, so I had to take the noise out, and I kept on getting a feeling and like images of me that I need to go to the mountains. And then I kept on asking myself, but which mountain? And then it was just on a random day, I went to the garage, I bought water, and then I saw on the those tags, Titicama Mountain. So I knew that I had to go to Titicama, and I was a very broke student. I had like 3 jobs, and I'm trying to pay school fees and do this. So I had that image that, okay, Titicama Mountains, and then I looked it up. It's a 5-day hiking trail. and I packed my bags during school holidays, and then I went to this trail with just a book and paper and like canned food. And then from there, I started writing as I was walking through the trails. The trails were so beautiful. It felt like I was at home, and at the same time, it felt like I went to visit home, but as the older me, the more mature, powerful, untouchable me. So I could easily then assess what was happening in the village and what the journey it took me to get to South Africa. So by the time I finished the last page, I was Penguin took the book already. I had a whole Netflix company coming to me about the book already. I finished my degree in computer science. I finished my honors degree in cybersecurity. There was just a sense of like, that was the perfect time for that ending, for that full stop, you know. It just felt like I was no longer that 5-year-old girl that was captured. I was now the woman that was built to write the story and talk about it and voice out, you know, for the voiceless children in the DRC.
This is your purpose in life. What you're doing right now and sharing this story, it really is. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
I finished it on the trail.
One more.
Yeah.
For Joy, yeah.
Joy. You speak about an insidious type of abuse, which I think is so much more, or not more, but similarly as devastating to the victim. Would you call that narcissistic abuse? Because for somebody to ghost somebody after 10 years of marriage and then recommitting, it really takes a certain type of person who lacks empathy. Do you agree with that? Or yeah.
It's a very difficult one. I mean, you know, Rebecca Davis asked me the same question when we did the Daily Maverick launch, and not about about one of the characters in the book, about whether I describe this person as a narcissist. And I'm very afraid of using labels that have not been clinically given by...
Because everybody is a narcissist, right? Everybody. If you don't like them, they're a narcissist.
In fact, there's a chapter in the book that so the way it works is like the 3 stories, and then in between the stories is my voice in reflecting on things. And one of the pieces is on labels, like on how often women are called you're a sociopath or in a conflict or whatever. And it's just like, don't describe labels if you're not professionally qualified to do so, even though like all the signs might be there that somebody is a narcissist. But what I do want to say is that I think that when, you know, these little tiny, that's not actually so little tiny forms of harm, over time, their effect is as bad as physical abuse, because if you think about it, you live in anxiety and with stress, and it takes away from your mental health, from your health and well-being. And so I don't do this in the book, but the way I see it is it's a form of slow violence. And it really is as bad as physical violence. And so when I look at Stephen, for example, what he's done feels violent. It feels violent in terms of how it impacted me, that there was a harm that cuts so deep, and it's taken me tremendous work to get to a place of being okay in the world, and not and also being open to trusting again, because that's very hard when somebody treats you that way. You want to kind of take your heart and put it in a cage, and lock it up and throw away the key, but you can't live like that also. Like life is about risks. Love is risk, and that's been very hard to learn, that you can keep yourself safe and not live, or take the risk and try and love again. And I was going to say take a calculated risk, but even with Stephen, like when I met Stephen, he was amazing. There was nothing to say that he would end up doing this. So there is no way of going, oh, but you should have known. I just think that there was, when he did what he did, it was a huge almighty shock, because I would never have said that he could be that cruel.
So in order to make you feel a lot better, people are going to buy books and you're going to make money, right?
Please, that will make me feel a lot better. It will also, even though I'm not into overpopulating the world, it will make me feel a lot better if Stephen has like 15 babies that cry at night and wake him up. Like, that will make me very happy.
If someone can just tweet that live for us quickly. Find Stephen and get in touch with him. Yeah. No, in all seriousness, thank you so much for a wonderfully open conversation. It was lovely to chat to you. It felt so comfortable, and it is one of the great things about these festivals, that they bring people together, and things, although some people don't show up or pull out, things work out. And I think you have given us so much food for thought here that it's made everyone coming out in this dismal day really worthwhile. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And yeah.
I'm moved by yours.
And your books are going to be on sale in the book tent for exclusives, and you're going to sign, hey? Thank
Mine
you.
is shelved as fiction, but it's not.